Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Chat Group Roulette. We may not be secure, but wow, are we fun. Episode 326, React Native turns 10.
Mazen, welcome back. I know you were just at a conference. What was the conference named? Something about AI.
All Things Open AI.
Okay. Now, when you say open AI, was it like open AI like ChatGPT open AI, or is this like sort of different?
Yeah. I should have paused. The conference was called All Things Open AI.
Not All Things Open AI. I wonder if they kind of intentionally thought people would make that.
No, well, okay. So a little bit of history. It's a spin-off, All Things Open.
Okay.
So yearly there's a conference called All Things Open that happens in Raleigh, here in North Carolina at the Raleigh Convention Center. I want to say they have like 5,000 attendees. It's crazy. Oh, wow. It's big. And they have multi-track workshops happening. I attended it back in 2013, 2014. Steve Wozniak was actually like the highlight speaker.
Oh, that's fun.
During lunchtime. It was pretty cool. And if you've ever seen these t-shirts, We Heart Open Source, like with the red heart, kind of like the I Heart NYC shirts, that's where it came from. And this conference, I believe, has been happening since 2013. But Todd, not our Todd and Mark, who run All Things Open, usually have an AI track as of recent. And I think they just decided, like, the AI track's getting big. What if we just spun it off into a conference on its own? So All Things Open AI was a conference on its own. Yeah, and it was a very long commute. It was about 5 minutes on the scooter to get there. Yeah,
that's fun. Yeah, that's awesome to have a conference in your backyard. I love living out kind of a little bit in the country, but that is one downside. There's really nothing tech anywhere near me. I have to go to Portland, which is at least a half-hour drive for anything, often more, but yeah, that's all right. Yeah. So yeah, that's awesome. Good to have you back. I know Gant gave a talk there that was super well received.
Yeah. His talk was titled Hacking AI. So he gave a very cool, interesting take. All the talks were about using AI to, for your industry and all that. And Gant was like, okay, let's take a different take and let's show you how we can break AI so you know better how to prepare yourself.
I love it.
During those scenarios. It was great. Yeah, it was a very fun talk and typical Gant fashion, entertaining and very informative.
Yeah, and every time I go to a conference with Gant and he gives a talk, he's just mobbed with people. Like, people want to talk to him afterward. It's amazing. Mm-hmm.
And the conference was sponsored by Infinite Red, so that was actually very fun to see. And people coming up and talking like, hey, we saw a picture of Infinite Red on the sponsor, and like getting to know us more and asking more about what we do.
Yeah, that's so cool. I always love seeing our logo there among all the giants that tend to sponsor these types of things. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I guess we got to go do our episode. Actually, pretty excited about this one. I'm Jamon. He's Mazen, back from the conference, and she's Robin. We are React Native Radio. Before we get into our topic for today, let's hear from our sponsor, Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the US. We are a team of 30 senior plus level React Native developers and support staff, and we've been doing this for pretty much a decade, which is going to come into play here in this episode. Actually, quite a bit. If you're looking for React Native expertise, hit us up, infinite.red/radio. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. All right, today we are going to turn back the clock all the way to 2015, 10 years ago, and talk about React Native. And that is because React Native was open sourced 10 years ago on March 26, 2015.
Should we sing happy birthday now?
I'm going to say no.
Let's skip that. Yeah. Wasn't there some deal where like it was like copyrighted for a while and you couldn't sing happy birthday if you were in some sort of commercial thing?
I want to know who owned the copyright on happy birthday.
I don't remember, but they actually would like enforce it. So I remember like restaurants wouldn't sing it. They would do their own thing.
Their own thing, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just get shut down for that. Okay, well, I'll put my cupcake away.
I think we'd get shut down for our singing more so than the copyright. But
that's why at Infinite Red we give everyone their birthday off so that they don't have to be sung to in Zoom.
that is totally the reason. But
Totally
it is
the reason.
correct. We give people their birthdays off. Paid holiday. You get your birthday off. It's kind of fun. All right. Now all of our audience is a little bit envious, but let's talk about 2015. What were you doing in 2015, Robin? What were you working on back then?
What was I working on? I was doing Rails.
Okay.
I had finished code school the year before, so I was working at my first tech job doing Rails, and that's also the year I got married. So
There was a lot going on.
There was a lot going on for me in 2015.
Yeah. Well, 10 years then this year. When's your anniversary?
This is in August.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Love it. Mazen, how about you? 2015. What was going on?
So 2015, I was doing PHP, CodeIgniter,
Okay.
HTML, CSS, jQuery, and SQL. Kind of doing full stack.
Yeah, that
building,
was pretty much
e-commerce websites.
pretty much the peak of tech. And I think it's all been downhill since CodeIgniter and PHP.
I agree. I miss CodeIgniter.
Did we name our Ignite library? Like, was it inspired by CodeIgniter?
Not that I know of, but that would be cool.
Because you did CodeIgniter too, right? Well,
I did
Jamon,
some.
what about you? What were you doing in
Yeah, you
2015?
did PHP for a while.
I did PHP, not in 2015. Well, actually, that's not true. We were still doing a little bit of PHP in 2015.
Maybe subconsciously
Oh, I loved PHP.
you named Ignite
Yeah.
after CodeIgniter.
Maybe. No, it's 2015. So I had run my first consultancy for 10 years. I started in 2005. And I remember telling my wife, because it was so stressful and I was working so many hours, I remember telling Kyra when we came into literally like as we're starting 2015, I'm like, if something doesn't change in 2015, like, I don't know what we're going to do because I'll probably have to shut it down. It's just too stressful, too much going on.
Mm-hmm.
This is news to Justin and Jed, who are now, they're in this call. They're not in the podcast, but they were working for me back then. But yeah, it was a tough time, like trying to figure this out. And that in 2015, everything did change. And that's where I'd met Todd and Ken and Gant, my eventual co-founders, at a conference the previous year. But then we ended up deciding to merge our two companies together to become Infinite Red. A lot of people have heard this story. And if you haven't, you can all, of course, go to building.infinite.red to hear our 13 episode mini-series podcast about the founding of Infinite Red and sort of our philosophy. So, that was kind of what I was doing. There was a lot going on there. All of my kids were already born. My youngest was born in 2013. And then I sold my house and I started building a house in that year too. So
Building a company and building a house.
yeah, that was a little wild. That was something. But yeah, lot going on there. So we were doing more Ruby on Rails, and we were also doing Ember back then. I had heard about React. React was like, I had a buddy, Tim Sanford, really cool guy, great developer. And he and I went to lunch one time and he's like, have you heard about React? React is really cool. And I was like, I don't know. You're talking about like, what was I thinking? I remember confusing it with something else. There's another, it was like reactive.js or something.
Yeah, there is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen that before.
Yeah, I thought he was talking about that.
Yeah.
I just didn't understand.
Well, back then it seems like there was a new framework every week
Right.
that someone was talking about.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. But React, actually, I had eventually kind of gotten on board with it by 2015. And as far as the patterns, we weren't using it, but I was even trying it out in different ways, like in native and stuff. But anyway, so just to kind of let people know what's going on, obviously, like I mentioned, March 26th. So Facebook actually announced React Native at ReactConf in January of 2015. And then they open sourced it.
And ReactConf is React's conference that they put on, I would say, sporadically.
Was that the first ReactConf, or was it a subsequent one? Who knows?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It was an early one because React hadn't been around.
Yeah,
all that
2013,
long.
I think, was when it
Yeah.
came out. But it was really, really like growing very, very quickly.
So they announced it, but they didn't open source it right away. They released like to the attendees of the conference got access to it, and people at Meta obviously,
Yeah.
but they didn't open source it right away.
Yeah, that's right. So at the React.js Conf in January, Tom Okino from Facebook announced React Native, and that was and they actually, Facebook was already using it and even had an app that was in the App Store, their Groups app. I don't know if their Groups app is still a thing.
It's not. It's all just part of the main.
It kind of got folded back in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And said, hey, we're going to open source this as well. And so everybody, there was sort of like a community reaction to this. Brian Cardarella, this is kind of funny because Brian and I had actually done a meeting like a day or two prior to prepping for this episode. And then as I'm Googling to trying to find like early reactions to that talk, the very first thing that popped up was an article by Brian. Of course, he's the CEO and founder of Dockyard, which is like another consultancy. And it was titled, Why I'm Disappointed in React Native. And but what's kind of interesting about this article is that he actually says this is amazing technology. Like he says this is amazing. He says, as an Ember developer, I'm jealous. Of course, we were doing Ember back then. And then he realized that he was also disappointed because that meant that Facebook was not going to be investing heavily in the web, in the mobile web, in PWAs. And instead they were going to go this direction. Because of course Facebook had talked about like, oh, we're just going to be doing web, for our mobile app and stuff, but it was terrible. And then as time went on, then they said that's a mistake. And then they started investing in this. So,
well, back then, was it still kind of not as mainstream to have an app for everything? Like people were still worried that users like wouldn't want to download an app for everything. And there was still this push to like keep everything on the web.
From what I remember from that time period, it was actually fairly understood that an app was a very good thing, but it was so expensive and you had to build it twice. And I remember doing this many times because I started building native apps in 2011. My first like actual shipped app was 2012. So I'd been doing it for like 3-4 years by that point, and it was like, we understand this is important, but also like people would come to me and just be like, well, all I can really afford is the iOS one. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to actually build an Android app. That started to change actually in 2015. That was actually the sentiment started changing. We need both. So I would say actually it was fairly well understood. It was just trying to achieve that was tough. It was hard to find mobile developers. And it was just very expensive.
Yeah. And I have a story. I'll try and keep it short, but like in 2015, the company that I was working at, I was the development manager at a team of a bunch of developers. We were working on our e-commerce websites. We were an umbrella company that acquired different brands and kind of rolled them into our e-commerce system. We called it Hydra. One of the brands that we acquired was called FitDeck. So think a deck of cards where you kind of shuffle them and you flip the first card and it's like, okay, 15 squats. You do 15 squats. You flip the next one. 10 pull-ups, push-ups, rest, whatever it is, and he kind of goes from there. And the guy was a former Navy SEAL, and I remember going into because we would meet with every brand, like ambassador, have you, and they would kind of come and say like, hey, they were like the marketing people of their brand, and like, hey, this is what I want for my app. And, I would take it back, and we would kind of prioritize it internally as the development team and the tech department. But I remember going to a meeting with him, and he was like, okay, I want it on my phone. I don't want these physical cards. It's going to help me be cheaper. It's going to help me be quicker, create more cards, more decks, and reach a bigger audience. And at that point, we did no mobile. Just like, all right, let me go and research it. So I remember just trying to figure out how to do it, kind of like Tinder style deck of cards on iOS. And that was my first time getting into native development. I got a prototype in iOS in like about a week or two, demoed it to them, and they were like, cool. And he was like, but all my friends use Androids. And I was like, oh boy. So we went back and we spoke internally and we're like, this is a lot. Like we would need a whole team dedicated, 2 developers at least for one brand, right? And then that kind of showed our speed. And then that kind of basically put that project to bed. And the development team, technology department as a whole told him, yeah, you're going to put your brand on the back burner for now. So keep coming up with your ideas and we'll print the decks. So that's like kind of good example of like, if React Native was maybe a year earlier, we could have leveraged it and then kind of show that that's like a good power of it then.
I think the world was pretty primed for something like this.
Yeah.
And
I think that's when people wanted apps.
They did,
But like didn't know they wanted it, right? It was like one of those scenarios where I want it, but I don't know what I can gain from it or why I need it.
yeah, this is fairly common with this sort of technology or platform where people kind of feel it out. But then once you have the, I don't know, you remember how everybody would say, oh, I have the Uber 4X, you know?
Right.
And
Uber for dog walkers.
right, exactly. And I actually heard that in a sales call just earlier this week, an Uber for something. They kind of acknowledged how like it's kind of a dated thing at this point, but it really is so key because you need to have that example of like what could you do, and then you apply it to other things. But there were also people who not only, you know, had some criticisms of it, but were very positive about it. It was very interesting to kind of go back through time and look at a lot of the tweets. And then March comes along, but everybody's kind of like, well, we have to wait to see it. And so March comes along and they release React Native iOS. And it was version 0.1.0, and it was released right at around 5:00 p.m. on March 26th. And we have a note in here that 0.2.0 and 0.3.0 came the next day.
Yeah.
Well, not even like 12 a.m.
Right.
was
Right.
0.2.
They were working overnight.
And then 7 p.m. Some
Yeah.
people, a team at Meta did not sleep
Right.
those 2 days.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the story of that. Holy cow. Maybe we could get some of them on. Yeah, that was something else. Of course, at that time, you know, I actually looked back through our Slack because I was curious to see what the reaction was. The only person in our Infinite Red Slack, now, granted, at this time, it was not yet a combined company. This was still just Infinite Red, the old Infinite Red, Todd's company. But Todd and I would talk every day at that point. We were really good friends. We would compare notes. We were already starting to talk about merging. Like this was kind of part of our DM conversation. And he said React Native, I'll quote him exactly. He said, React Native is big deal. And
is big deal.
Is big deal. Yeah. And I responded back and said, is a big deal or is like big deal? Like, who cares? And he says, is an important development. So
be careful. Todd's probably going to edit this one.
I know. I loved it though. But I'm going to compliment Todd a lot here. So he'll be very nice to me, I think.
You had to make it like a criticism sandwich. So you got to throw in, you got to throw in a little,
I just thought it was funny.
jab
I just
at
thought
the
it was
end
funny.
and just make it a sandwich.
That is funny though. Yeah.
But he said this is a big deal, and both of us were doing native development at the time, and I was not super excited about putting JavaScript in because I had done that before with PhoneGap and it didn't work out very well. But that was also WebView, and that was not what React Native was doing, and I didn't totally understand that. Like Todd did, but I didn't. And he kept coming back to it. Like I kept looking at our conversation. He would bring it back and he would say, hey, you know, React Native, this is looking quite interesting. This is looking very good. And of course, he was starting to get inquiries about doing Android. And so he was doing some Android projects and we were as well. And it was like, well, maybe we can actually use this technology. But we kind of put it on the back burner. We were talking about merger, and that was kind of a big thing that we were trying to do. And we had a lot of projects going on and whatnot. So we didn't actually try it. We actually, you know, we had it on but it was also just iOS. Like it's not going to actually help us, right? Like there's no Android. We had to still build the Android side. So what good is that, right? But in September of 2015, which was it was 2 weeks prior to us finishing the merger. We had started running the two companies side by side. We had merged our Slacks. We had started just acting like we were one company just to kind of make sure it would work and kind of come together. And
good dating period.
We call it a dating period. We totally do. Yeah, it's absolutely. And so us owners would get together and, you know, talk about decisions we were going to be making, you know, as after the merger. Merger was slated to happen October 1st of 2015, which means, by the way, this year, 2015 to 2025, Infinite Red also turns 10. And 2 weeks prior to that, Facebook also releases React Native for Android. And this really kind of solidified it in our minds. So 2 weeks out, we need this technology. We have some projects starting soon. We had some projects that were going to be starting in like 2 weeks after the merge, or even like 1 week after the merge, I think. And so we were like, okay, we have to talk to our team. And it's so interesting looking back at these conversations in Slack. It's so cool that we have them still. But we have to talk to our team. We have to make sure they're on board. It was kind of a whirlwind because there's so much happening right now. Like we have to we literally had to lay off our employees from the previous companies and then hire them in the new company and do onboarding and all that stuff, get the new system together. It was just so much work. And then we also decided to change technologies at the same time. And so actually a little known fact, we also switched from Ruby on Rails to Elixir at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Because apparently we couldn't get enough pain. So it was a absolute whirlwind, but React Native Android looked interesting, and we talked to our team, and two of our top developers at that time were Steve Kellogg and Gant Laborde, who's obviously an owner at Infinite Red, but he was leading our biggest projects. And we had 2 new projects starting. Each of them were going to be leading those projects, and it was like, hey, we're going to go to those clients and ask them if they'd be interested in doing React Native, because then we don't have to build it twice. And they were amenable to doing that. And so we started just right after that. Version 0.11.4 was our first version of React Native. It was not long. I actually don't know the exact version when React Native Android was released. But this was very shortly after. It was probably only a few versions after Android and iOS became a full public thing.
You mentioned that you're changing technologies at the same time you're merging 2 companies. That's a lot of training. How did that work, getting your developers up to speed with React Native while you're also learning React Native along with the whole world is learning React Native. It's new. How did you get your team up to a point where they're able to build with React Native for client?
So that is such a blur in my mind, because I think there were so many things going on. One was my team didn't just do native development. We also did web and backend and design. So we had a bunch of different things going on where Todd's team was primarily native development, native app development. Mm-hmm. And his team was also much more experienced. I think I was the same age as their youngest employees.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Where I was the oldest person at my company for by quite a bit. And so I had a lot more junior developers at that time. And so what we ended up doing was we kind of zippered our teams together in that we would put an experienced, Infinite Red person with a less experienced ClearSight person. And then we'd pair them up on projects.
So sort of a mentor-mentee relationship times however many 5.
But we also still had lots of projects that were still ongoing that we had to kind of that was I had to keep my company open and build them and then pay Infinite Red, the new Infinite Red. It was such a weird setup to try to wrap up.
And that
projects.
Was mostly web projects, right?
Yeah, a lot of web projects, but also some native projects, and so we had a little bit of time. Mainly we started with those 2. So we had Gant and Steve, and those 2 started out with just working kind of side by side, figuring out how to build React Native apps. And I go back and look at those discussions, and it's a lot of things about do we use camel casing, or do we use, underscores like we do in Ruby and whatnot?
This is the stuff that hadn't been figured out yet. It was conventions that weren't established.
Not at all. Yeah.
And I talked about this in my talk. I remember this is how Ignite happened.
That's right.
Because they were innovating every single day, just figuring stuff out, and they needed to capture it.
Yeah, that totally directly led to Ignite. I think released in April or something like that, of 2016. So that was a huge amount of work, and those 2 really pushed it forward. My job actually changed, so I was kind of everything. I was CTO and CEO and CFO and everything else that could possibly be other than dev, but I also did dev. And I kind of went to I'm chief operating officer. I'm focused on running projects. I'm focused on doing sales. I'm kind of more on the business side. And so when I look back, actually, I kind of was more out of it. I would play around with React Native just out of curiosity, but I wasn't doing it as directly as Gant and Steve and the rest of them. Even Todd was doing more than I was at that time. And Todd doesn't really do much of that stuff anymore. He still codes, but it's more kind of internal projects that are more web-based stuff. And so it was really interesting to kind of look back at that. Now, the whole world, like you said, Robin, was trying to figure this out. So there were articles coming out like, here's a best practice on how to do this. But it was like class components. It was also things like you didn't have like auto linking. People don't even think about auto linking anymore. Like you just simply npm or yarn install and then, pod install or whatever. But back then you had to like run commands. Linking. Yeah. Or like
you ran commands and I remember you had to go into Xcode.
Yeah. You had to edit files.
Select things and like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun.
And of course, tooling came along eventually to link things up automatically. I think Mike Grabowski was the first person, if I remember right, to add in auto linking. But we felt every bump and bruise. We contributed a lot to the early React Native. You'll see a lot of Infinite Red engineers in there fixing kind of very important things in React Native.
Well, yeah. I'm sure there was so much low-hanging fruit back then.
Huge. Yeah. So much stuff.
I think even looking, so you were talking about class components, right? So that was probably right before hooks. So you have hooks now, you had class components. And looking back at the code from early days, I don't know if there was a change in between this, but there's the whole like create class object that had like a return within it, which returned. It's hard to explain. I think hopefully we can we'll have a blog post eventually that will probably include this, but I remember looking at early React Native code, and it was like something like React Native.create class or React.create class. I don't remember. And that's an object. And within that object, you like put other objects within it. Like render was one of them. And that's kind of, to me, nowadays trippy to think of because we don't do that anymore, right? It's so different. And it's so cool to see the evolution of it, where now I think it's the developer experience that matters the most. Well, back then it was more of, let's get this thing working the easiest way and then just kind of go that way.
Yeah. If you actually go, you can actually go read the archived docs from old versions and all the examples are still class components.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Component did mount, component did update, which if you ask Gant, he said those were the good old days.
The good old days. There were some awkward parts of it that I think kind of led to hooks. So, for example, you had to do like .bind this.
I remember, this .bind in order to bind pressables.
Basically, your callbacks would kind of lose their they'd lose their context, and so you wouldn't end up with a reference to the original object. You couldn't call methods on it and stuff. It was just a function, so you'd have to do .bind this to say this method is a method on this particular instance. And yeah, it was just a little bit awkward and stuff like that. But also not just that. Trying to reuse compose functionality was often quite hard. Like, let's say, for example, these days you'd do something like, use safe area insets.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know for sure exactly how the internals are with that particular hook, but say that you needed something on mount and on unmount. And let's say you needed something for, you needed to set some state and then, do something there. All of those things, you would end up with having to insert code in multiple places in your class component to do what we do now in one line. And that's really the big difference is you could just use one line and it does all of it. It does mount, unmount, set state, all that stuff can be done in one thing. So that was kind of the benefit of hooks. However, hooks came with some indirection, not to get too far into that, but it kind of, there's definitely an evolution, and this has been an evolution right alongside React. But yeah, React Native was amazing. And then of course, Expo also came out not long after too. We had Charlie Cheever on to talk about Expo and the origins of Expo not long ago. You should definitely go listen to that episode if you haven't. It's one of our favorite episodes as hosts. Charlie's amazing, and his team is amazing, and he talks about how Expo was actually already underway before React Native was released, and as soon as they released it, they adopted it as the underlying tech.
This is a perfect fit. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, the history of Expo, it really is the history of React Native. They're inextricably linked.
Yeah. Now, we don't have a lot of time left in the episode, and we've barely scratched the surface here. But I do want to ask you, well, what do you think are kind of the biggest moments in the 10 years that you can think of? Good and bad.
Definitely the settling on React navigation was a big deal.
Yep.
I remember there was a lot of churn.
That was in 2017.
How best to do how best to do navigation. Like I remember my first project used React Native Router Flux, React Native Router Flux.
Yeah, same.
Which was really unintuitive to use. And so, standardizing on React navigation was a big deal.
Yeah.
Auto linking.
Auto linking was a big,
but that was a
big
big one. Yeah, just to help with upgrades, that was key.
Obviously, hooks, which we just talked about. I would say the Airbnb article.
Positive and negative.
Yes.
Positive and negative. It was really kind of a turning point where you either kind of continued to be all in on React Native, you doubled down, or you exited with the Airbnb folks
if you were already
who
on the
stopped
fence.
believing in it. Yeah, if you were already on the fence, you kind of picked a side.
For those who don't know, the Airbnb was using React Native, and then they wrote an article saying we're going away from it, and this is why. The funny thing is, if you actually read the article, they say most of our engineers liked React Native. And it was a bunch of other kind of almost non-tech related reasons that they went away from it. What's funny is they also continued to use Metro, and they use it to this day because Metro is really
I think
cool.
people just read the title.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, wait, Airbnb's not using React Native? Okay, it must be bad. And then that's when it all went down.
It was a big deal because they were huge advocates for it in the beginning. They were one of the first huge companies to really adopt it.
Yeah.
And they were at a lot of conference talks, like they released libraries. They were a big player, so them leaving was a big deal, and it was kind of a moment of reckoning of whether React Native would survive that, and it definitely did, and it's even stronger now. And I think people look back on that being like, oh, well, they probably jumped the gun a little too soon, and React Native has only improved from there.
I think one milestone, I don't know how to phrase it, or it's a long period of time, but it's the eject phase.
Oh, yeah.
Eject or don't eject phase.
Expo eject
Yes.
phase. Yeah.
Yeah, that was like always a big conversation.
Yeah.
So I think the whole Expo eject or don't eject phase, and then probably when you didn't have to think about that anymore, when Expo was like,
when
okay,
Expo
hey.
released their, I think it was when they released continuous native generation.
Yeah. Well,
they
had asked me, so I jumped on a Zoom call with them. I don't remember exactly when, but they were like, what would prevent you from using Expo? And I kind of gave them what everybody said, around like, it's very difficult to integrate custom native code, and we need to do that all the time and stuff like that. And they listened very well. I'm not saying that I had, but I'm sure they were hearing this from a lot of people, but I just remember that. And they asked good questions. And then, they eventually came out with continuous native generation. And I remember Keith Kurek at one of our Chain Reacts giving the talk, Not Your Grandparents' Expo. I gave him that title, actually. He was asking what I thought about it. I'm like, this is what you got to call this. But that's what it was kind of like, hey, this is a new generation. I also think the new architecture, obviously, huge deal.
I think this year is going to be that turning.
Yeah, huge
We're going to look
point.
back and say that 2025 was the year that we went from talking about the new architecture to talking about the legacy architecture.
Yeah, exactly. So I can say one thing. In 10 years, and I've never done this with any tech, I've never once actually questioned if React Native should be our primary focus and only focus like it is. It's never even really occurred to me that would not be the case, because it's just been a rocket ship for us. It's been amazing. It's been an awesome ride. I mean, I thought it was great in 2020, like 5 years into it, but it's just gotten better, and it keeps getting better, and it keeps going faster and faster. And we bet on the right technology. And I'm so grateful for that. It was a huge deal, because it would have been really tough if React Native didn't go anywhere. That would have been a really tough transition to have to go and transition again. And I got to give a lot of credit to the community for this, because the community has stepped up in so many ways with the ecosystem and helping with React Native itself. And then just the ideas behind it. Of course, Facebook's investment in this. Jordan Walk for
Meta. They
originally.
became Meta in the middle of those
Yeah, they did
10
become
years.
Meta. Yeah, I say Facebook because almost everything back then it was just called
Right.
Facebook.
It was
so.
found like it was Facebook, literally Facebook, the app, the social media platform was instrumental in React Native
huge.
becoming a thing. So we still think about Facebook, even though it's Meta now.
Yeah, and I think definitely the community, because the slimming phase would have never happened without the community, right?
What they now call the lean core, but yes.
The slimming, that's better than lean core. Come on.
Yes, that was a big deal too. Pulling stuff out of core, and putting that into separate packages, like WebView, which was a huge source of tons of issues in the main repo, and it was like, nope, let's pull that out of there, make it its own thing, and all that. I have a question for you before we wrap up. In the 10 years between launching and now, do you know how many total versions have been released as of this recording?
First number
Total,
that came to
including
my
minor,
mind.
including patch versions.
Everything, yeah.
Okay. For some reason, the number 312 came to mind.
Okay, 312.
I'm gonna
What do you got, Robin?
Let's see.
It should be like 1,000.
I'm gonna say 367.
Okay, both of you are way off. It's way higher.
What?
Way higher.
Yeah.
What is it?
Orders of magnitude higher.
It is 2,112 as of today.
No.
What? That's like an average of
That's like
Isn't that an
20
average of, like,
patches per minor
way more.
version.
way more than that. 25?
I mean, in 10 years, you only have, doing some quick math, 3,650-ish days. And there's been almost a release, basically a release every 2 out of 3 days.
Wow.
I'm guessing that probably also includes alphas. I wasn't really thinking about those.
Okay, you're right.
Yeah,
Wait,
the
does this
alphas.
make it kind of not as impactful? Because you're right, all these nightlies are in there too.
Yeah. I'm thinking
the
of
nightlies are
I'm
important.
thinking of 0.76.1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 77 comes out.
Yeah.
Nightlies are just as important, right? Because despite us not using them,
Yeah.
I'm sure people at Meta are running tests against those nightlies, which they are now automatically done.
Right.
But still, those are still important versions to keep in mind.
I'm a little disappointed though, because I was so impressed by this number, and now, yeah.
Now you're like, it's
Okay.
because they started doing nightly builds.
All right, so if we go look at releases, and I don't know when they started using GitHub releases, but now your guys, what was the numbers?
I
said
said
312.
I said 367.
Oh my goodness. There's 378, 379.
Whoa, Robin.
Winner, winner.
Robin wins. That was really good. Okay, yeah, that's actually more accurate. All right, let's wrap it up. We've been here way too long. Sorry about that, editors. Thanks everybody for jumping along with us in this time machine. It'd be really fun to hear your experiences. When did you start React Native? Tag us on Twitter at React Native RDIO, or just email us, I guess, rnradio@infinite.red. We'd love to hear that. That'd be a lot of fun.
We'll see you for React Native Turns 20.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun. All right, happy birthday, React Native. We're not going to sing the song, but you've been very good to us at Infinite Red, so thank you.
Bye, everyone.
As always, thanks to our editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor, Jed Bartosky, our marketing and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Mazen Chami. Our producers and hosts are Jamon Holmgren, Robin Hines, and Mazen Chami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/radio. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio on all the major podcasting platforms.